I grew up in a small rural town called Funkley in northern Minnesota. It was a tight-knit community where everyone knew each other. Despite the town's reputation for being remote, it was once home to a small population that resided there up until 2004, when everything changed. For years, life in the town was peaceful and idyllic. I had a loving family, my wife and 3 children, 2 daughters, and a son. Though there weren't many kids for my kids to play around with, we found solace in exploring the woods and hiking around the area. One fall evening in 2004, things took an unexpected turn. My neighbor approached me as I was putting equipment away in my shed, telling me about some strange lights in the sky. He pointed out the unusual patterns of their rapid movement, and I could see that there was something there. Unfortunately, this was before cell phones became widely popular. So my neighbor hurried off to get his radio and camera, which was the only high-quality one in town as digital cameras weren't that common then. He was an aspiring photographer with a camera that required a roll of film and even had a darkroom to process them. After setting up his camera for night photography and tuning the radio to different frequencies, we realized that none of the local stations had any information about the strange lights we were seeing. As it turns out, what we witnessed that night was more than just fancy lights in the sky. It was an incident that changed everything I knew, and I tried to inform the authorities. However, they dismissed me, calling me insane or a deranged psycho. I even tried telling anyone who would listen, but after almost being thrown into a mental health facility, I decided it was better to keep my mouth shut. It's something that still weighs heavily on me to this day. The phenomenon continued for almost an hour, and gradually the whole town slowly began to notice it. A commotion ensued, and everyone came out to see what was happening. My family heard the noise and, with curiosity, joined me outside to observe the bizarre spectacle. As more people gathered, the lights stopped moving sporadically and began hovering in one place. Shortly after, they started to grow even brighter and seemed to be heading towards us. Everyone's nerves were on edge, and the town's conversation buzzed with speculations of whether we should be worried or panicking. Questions raced through everyone's minds. What was happening? Was it something friendly, or was it a hostile sign? Perhaps it was a secret government project. The unknown became a source of fear and curiosity that night. The UFO moved at an astonishing speed, covering the distance to the tree line in a matter of moments. Its proximity gave us a clearer idea of the rough size of this mysterious object. As there were hardly any streetlights in our town, someone ran over to the nearest bright floodlights in an open field to turn them on in hopes of getting a closer glimpse. However, as the lights illuminated the craft, there weren't any typical sounds of combustion or engine roars to be heard. The only sound it made was a slight hum, which was strange and eerie. The realization hit us that this must be something not of human origin, or perhaps a top-secret government project, although most of us believed it was a true UFO. As the craft glided above the floodlights, half of the onlookers were fascinated by the sight, while the other half began to panic at the realization of a UFO hovering above them. Now clear in full detail, we could see that it was a flying saucer, similar to those portrayed in sci-fi films and comics. It had no blades or visible means of propulsion, but there appeared to be a force field or barrier that surrounded it. The barrier was barely visible, but it was unmistakable in its presence around the craft. The UFO continued its descent and proceeded to land in the field, causing concern among the onlookers. Witnessing a UFO was one thing, but the possibility of encountering extraterrestrial life was truly terrifying. Although, as far as we knew, there hadn't been any hostile actions so far. As I watched from the edge of my yard, a big group of people gathered about 50 yards away from the craft, awaiting its descent. My neighbor, who was an aspiring photographer, continued setting up his camera on a tripod. Seeing him get closer to the craft made me concerned for his safety, but he reassured me he'd stay on the edge of the field and document everything. Then, in an instant, everything went dark. There was a bright flash of light followed by a pulse-like sound, and the power to everything in the town shut off, leaving us all in darkness. Frantic shouting ensued, and everyone started to panic. Suddenly, the door of the flying saucer slid open, and a blinding light emitted from within the craft. A platform extended from the door to the ground, and I found myself walking towards the field along with the rest of the onlookers, including my family. Anticipation mounted as we grew silent and restless. As we watched in fear and curiosity, the two figures slowly descended the ramp from the craft. The bright white light emitting from their backs made it hard to see their faces clearly. The floodlights on the field flickered back on, illuminating their appearance. They were about 6 feet tall and wearing loose-fitting white garments with hoods pulled over their heads. The hoods drooped over their eyes, making it difficult to discern their features. As the crowd watched in silence, the two beings stood motionless at the bottom of the ramp. The peaceful and idyllic nature of our small town had been shattered by the sighting of the UFO, and now our hearts were filled with fear and uncertainty. Suddenly, a bright flash of light emanated from the craft, and the power went out, plunging us into darkness once again. The door of the craft slid open, and a platform extended towards the ground. Anticipation and fear were palpable among the onlookers as we held our breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The hooded figures slowly lifted their bony fingers to pull back their hoods, revealing their startlingly white and lengthy hair. Their black eyes sent chills down my spine, and their ears were hidden under their thick hair that flowed down their mid-back. Their nose and mouth were human-like, but their lips were thin with a dullish gray highlighting them. We remained frozen in terror as we stared at them, and they seemed to stare back at us, unblinking. Finally, one brave soul stepped forward and asked the entities what they wanted and why they were here. As he approached, he extended his hand in greeting. But in an instant, an entity whipped out a device from underneath their garment and pointed it at the man. A flash illuminated the crowd, and the man was sent flying backward by 5 feet before he landed on the ground. Fear and anger rippled through the crowd. Some men moved forward, intending to attack the entities, while others fled. A shrill, high-pitched noise emanated from all around us, causing my head to feel as though it was about to rip apart. The blinding light made it impossible to see, and the pain was unbearable as I fell to my knees, screaming. The noise was deafening, and it consumed me, leaving me writhing in agony. Gradually, the noise subsided, and there was a deafening silence. I removed my hands from my eyes, and the reality of what had happened hit me like a ton of bricks. The men around me had all gone mad, but somehow, I seemed to be unaffected.